I'm Mike McGreevy. I'm the Vice President for Advancement at Wells College. And I have had the privilege over about 6.5 years to get to know many alumni of Wells College and its 147-year-old history. And one of my biggest pleasure has getting to know Jane. And over the years, hearing your wonderful stories and hearing about your lifelong relationship, friendship with Isabel, we thought what a wonderful idea to capture this friendship, this relationship, these memories, be able to share this specifically with the Wells family, but I also know that your individual families will be very interested in putting this all together and having this as a keepsake. It is December 18th. We're here in East Windsor, New Jersey, and we have a few questions. And you all know who you are, but I've got Bill Engel, Jane Engel, and Isabel Sefton here. Isabel, you were a class of 41 at Wells.
That's right.
Sociology major. And Jane, you were class of 42 at Wells, a sociology major. So we'll get to that in a minute. But Bill and I have a few questions, but we'd really love to just hear you talk. And I would like to get us started by saying, where did it all begin? Where did you two get to know each other?
Well, I went to Wells because Isabel was a year ahead of me and had persuaded me to come up there to Wells. And we first heard about it.
Right, years after we got together. We sort of got together, as I remember, when you were about 5 and I was 6.
Yeah.
And your mother was marrying Dr. Bill, and he and my father were associates.
Yeah.
And that's when our friendship started.
Yeah.
Did you both go to all the same schools together through grammar school and high school?
Yes, we went to St. Lawrence Academy for Young Ladies. That's what it was called. We went there for grammar and high school. And then Isabel went on to Wells, and then I went on to Wells.
Right.
And so it's been many, many years.
Now, you had told me at one point that because St. Lawrence Academy was a Catholic school, that the nuns would not write recommendation letters for non-Catholic colleges for you. Was that true?
Well, I think when we went, they were not in favor of our going to a non-Catholic college.
Yeah.
And our families thought we should get to know the world. So they were not really encouraging, as I recall.
We had to go up to Columbia to take the PSATs and everything, and they didn't help us at all.
No.
You and I, you were your head. We went up to Columbia to take all those tests because they had no part of it at St. Lawrence.
And then I also remember they said, well, after all, your mother was divorced.
Oh, yes,
and that was another problem.
The principal called me in to say, I'm so sorry to hear, as if it was a terrible thing because my parents were divorced. And I said, so what, I didn't even think about it. But they made a big deal that my parents had been divorced. And so.
They were hoping Isabel would be a good influence on you?
Yeah.
The other way around, I think.
Now, both of you lived your whole life until after you got married or went to college on the Upper East Side in Manhattan, right?
That's right.
We lived at 21 East 90th, and Isabel lived at Park Avenue. And then after we moved from 21 East 90th over to 520 East 86th, Isabel and her family moved into our apartment at 21 East 90th.
That's right.
Yeah, and and then when we moved over to 520, everybody was saying, "What are you going way over there for?" And of course, after that, Gracie Square and all of that built up, and it became quite the place to live. Right. But when we first moved over there, Vincent Astor had built those apartments, and he lived in one of them, and he owned 3 of those apartments, 120 East End and 530 and 520 East 86th. And he started that whole area over there.
And this was all in the 1930s, basically?
Oh, yeah.
When when we moved into 21 East 90th,
Yeah.
we were moving in because it was a little less expensive. Because the Depression, as I recall, that affected us.
Yeah.
Indirectly, maybe. Well, we didn't starve, we didn't go around with cups, but the patients didn't have the money. And both fathers, I think,
Yeah.
had a lot of patients that didn't pay.
Yeah.
And that was the custom, and that with many doctors. They weren't the only noble ones.
Yeah.
Right.
So we cut our expenses. And your mother, I think, was expecting Bill. That's why you moved to a larger.
Yes, because I had the two half brothers, and Bill was, and then that's when we moved, and because we needed more room, we only had 2 bedrooms, and I had to share the bedroom with Mother and Dr. Bill. I remember for a while. That wasn't very successful. So, so then we had to move, get another bedroom, because Bill got my bedroom, my old bedroom. He and the nurse got my bedroom, and I had to move in with Mother and Dr. Bill.
And then we moved right in that. When you moved out, we moved
Then
in.
you moved in. That's right.
So we've been following each other one way or the other in the very beginning.
When you were growing up in elementary and high school, typically, what would your days be like in the afternoon after school and then on the weekends? What sort of things would you do generally?
Well, we would walk to everything. We walked back home, and then when we had doctors or dentist appointments, they used to give us the car fare, but we'd walk.
The bus.
Then we'd save the money and we'd go to Schrapp's for a chocolate soda with the money. Instead of using it for the car fare, we walked, and then we started with Schrapp's when we had doctors or dentist appointments. And often we would be the same day, or we'd try to arrange it.
Oh.
So,
We would drop in sometimes and see Dr. Bill on the way down.
yeah.
And
Because his office was at 660 Madison, which was right on our way, and we would drop. And then our friends, the Terminies, her mother had a shop right around the corner on East 61st Street, right off Madison. And we used to go there. Mary Jane McShane, right?
That's right.
And we used to stop in there and see her. And
then we walked around the reservoir a lot. There's
Oh,
a
yes.
reservoir in Central Park.
Okay.
It started about 79th and went up to 110th. And we did that fairly frequently.
oh yes.
Now it accounts for our beautiful figures.
We used to walk around the reservoir a lot. Yeah. Yeah.
So we,
Where was the school? Where was St. Lawrence Academy?
84th and Madison.
Ah,
Yeah. And it was connected with St. Ignatius Church. You see, it was all
okay.
part of the St. Lawrence was the girls' private academy, and then they had the boys' Regis High School.
Loyola too.
And Loyola, where was around the corner. It was all connected with St. Ignatius Loyola Church at 84th and Park, which is still there.
Yeah.
So,
As of the moment.
Yeah.
so, but it was all connected with St. Ignatius Church. And so we went all through, I spent all 12 years at that school.
Then one other thing that you're not mentioning, Jane was very popular with the guys. And this convent school that we went to
Okay.
had boys up to about the 6th grade or 7th grade. And they used to follow her. One guy's name was Edward Mary Crummy.
Yeah.
Is that a terrible thing to do to a boy? Last name was Crummy.
Yeah.
And then the other one was Jack Riley.
Jack Riley.
And I was just in the way, but
She wasn't.
I was, but I had to watch her. But you were. They trailed you all over.
So
Anyway.
But unlike today, your activities weren't all planned out for you. You weren't in athletics or
That's right.
playing an instrument necessarily or something like that.
Yeah.
It was much more free time. And
That's right.
free form.
After school, you were pretty much free, really.
Oh
As I
yeah.
remember.
Yeah.
When I became a little older, on Saturdays, my father had me working in his office answering the telephone because the secretary didn't come in.
Okay.
And that's the only thing that I remember doing.
And then we used to go to the same place in the summer. We always went to Connecticut, and our families would rent houses in Connecticut, and we would spend our summers together.
That's right.
Yeah, and mainly in Westport. Remember the Longshore Country Club?
I don't.
They'd drop us off in the morning our mothers, and pick us up at 5 o'clock in the afternoon and leave us there all day long. We were at this country club, the Longshore, remember?
And the thing, go ahead.
Okay.
No, I was just going to say, the club cost $100 for a family membership.
Yeah.
Golf, tennis, swimming. Now,
Yeah.
this was during the Depression.
Yeah.
This was like 1934,
Yeah.
maybe,
Yeah.
to about
Early
37.
early 20s, early 30s, yeah.
And that was also where Westport was still sort of the country, right?
That's
Oh,
right.
yeah.
So as
Yeah.
opposed to now where
Yeah.
it's a commuting
Yeah.
town.
Yes. Well, there were a few communities, but it was a real arty town then. And a lot of the people that had houses, for example, during the Depression would rent to the people from the city who would come out and rent the place for 3 months.
Yeah.
There usually was always a room in it that they put all their valuables to
Yeah.
from the
Yeah.
renters.
And then your fathers would drive out on the weekends, basically?
My father
Well,
commuted.
Her father went every night. Dr. Bill only came weekends. But your father came every
That's
night.
right. And then remember how they used to think you were his girl? Dr. Bill's girl? When you go to a restaurant with Dr. Bill?
Yeah. Oh, yes.
And people thought that he was-
During the week when he was alone, he'd go out with the secretary, and people would say, "Oh, look at Dr. Healy there with this." But a lot of the a lot of people did get in trouble because the women went away all summer and left them, except they went on the weekends. So the men, during the week, a lot of them got in trouble.
That's probably why my father came home every night.
Yeah.
I'd be surprised.
How long did it take him to drive each way? Do you remember?
Oh, no, he took the
We
train.
took the train.
Yeah.
Okay.
My mother took him to the train, and he would leave like at 7:30, sometimes a little earlier in the morning, and get home about 7:30 at night.
Okay.
It's a long commute.
Yeah.
So when it came time to start thinking about college,
Yeah.
and you started at the early on.
Well,
Jane.
Isabel was a year ahead of me, and she was the one that discovered Wells. Well, how did that
My
sound?
mother had a cousin
Yeah.
who had gone there,
Okay.
and we wanted to go to a small college and a girls' school, and one that was, conservative in a way compared to some of them, I guess. So we went up to Wells, and I liked it very much. And,
It's on the same lake as Cornell, Lake Aurora, sit right up from Cornell.
Yes.
And but we had all these rules and regulations in those days. You had to be in at 12 o'clock.
no men above the first floor.
No men were allowed. And we had to be in at 12 o'clock.
That was on weekends too. Not
Oh,
during-
yes,
not
yeah.
during the week.
Yeah. And so there were all the rules and regulations that we went by that now, when you think about it, and if you smoked, they only had one smoking room, and you had to go there if you smoked. And otherwise you were not allowed to smoke anywhere else except in that smoking room.
That's right.
Remember that?
That's right. I do remember.
In the dining hall, you ate in the big dining hall that we
Yes.
still have
Yeah.
today.
Still have. That's right.
Ate with everyone else in the big dining room, and they had no sororities
Right.
or anything like that. I don't know if they still probably, I don't know anymore.
No.
But they had a the school was divided into the odds and the evens, depending on the year.
Odds and evens,
Still
depending
are.
on what year you were. She was an odd because she was 41, and I was an even because
And
I
you're
was
still
42.
friends.
And we're still
So,
friends.
Yes.
But they had basketball teams then,
Yeah.
the odds and the evens, and it was
Yeah.
all intramural, I guess you call that. But,
yeah,
so,
yeah.
Well, you'll be happy to know that that tradition is as strong now
Oh,
as
is it really?
was.
I wonder.
Absolutely.
Oh, really? It is?
It
Oh, it was
is.
almost violent at times.
It is. There are
The odds and evens.
banners and class songs and class colors
Oh,
and sister classes and the odds and evens.
Uh-huh.
Oh, yes.
oh, that.
Oh, really? Still?
So,
Uh-huh.
so you both mentioned you studied sociology.
That's
Why,
right.
why sociology?
Well, I did because I love people and I like being involved with people and personnel work, and that's how I got into it. Because in the summer, when we get jobs in the summer, I tried to get something that would be in the personnel department where I'd have to deal with people. And then one summer I worked in a department store because then I had to deal with everybody that came in to the department store, remember? And no, that's mine now, you tell.
Well, it seems to me that I went into sociology because I really I wanted to change the world, you know. Well, and then when I got out of college, in those days, you had to type to get any kind of a job almost, and I couldn't, you know, I have no manual dexterity, and I never did have any. So then my father decided I should go to Columbia University to study typing, which was sort of crazy. So I went, and I also took a few courses in personnel, and then I really thought that's what I would like to get into. So after I finished typing, they found jobs. They had an employment office at Columbia, and they got me a job typing in a personnel office, and $21 a week, as I recall. And I was a lousy typist. Terrible, even after a year. So they promoted me. And so you never know.
I was with the Red Cross during the war, and locally, I wanted to go overseas, but in those days, you paid attention to your parents, and I wanted to go overseas, but my mother had a fit, so I stayed with them locally. But I was with the Red Cross all during the war, and during the Second World War, during the war, as we say, the Second World War.
And talk about what you did when you were working with the Red Cross.
I was head of the emergency department, and they sent all the people that came in. For instance, they wanted to get one of their service people home, men mostly then, because someone was ill or whatever. They did get service in those days, would give emergency leaves, and they could come home. And then when they wanted to stay, they had to come in to us to get an extension of their leave. And so that's the Red Cross did a lot of that to help the. But people blamed the Red Cross when they didn't get it, but it wasn't. We only reported to the commanding officer, and it was the commanding officer that made the decision. But people used to think it was the Red Cross's decision, and they blamed the Red Cross for when they didn't get an extension of their leave, or they couldn't get someone home on an emergency leave. But we always had the doctors that we checked with, and you know, sometimes the doctor would say, no, they don't need to come home, there's nothing the matter. And the families didn't know that, but they blamed the Red Cross. So we got blamed for everything during the war. Oh.
Didn't you have war brides coming, a couple of people?
And then we had the war brides coming in, and that was interesting because we'd meet the ships when the war brides came over. We'd meet the ships, and then mostly they didn't know the families at all. They had never met the families. The men were still overseas, and the families would come. And it was interesting because some families were so nice and would be nice, and others didn't want any part of these girls that, you know, that their sons had married overseas, and they didn't want any part of them. So we met all the ships that came in, and with the war brides that came over. And a lot of the girls did get married just to get over here. They didn't really care about getting married, but just to get over here. And so they didn't care whether they met the families or not. When they got off the ship, as far as they were concerned, they didn't care whether they met the families. But part of our job was to see that they had to be met by a member of the family.
And what would happen if the family wouldn't take them in?
Well, we always, they had to arrange ahead of time that they would agree to meet these girls, and otherwise they couldn't come over here unless they had somebody here that was there to welcome them, because they couldn't come over.
And you never got a situation where someone said, well, we'll welcome them, and then they didn't show up?
Well, yes. Oh, yes, every once in a while. But then we had emergency housing and things, you know, that we take care of them. And but most of the families, they weren't very gracious about it, because naturally they didn't know anything about these girls that their boys had married overseas. But most of them were were nice. Some of them weren't, but I used to feel sorry for some of the girls. And some of the girls just married to get over here if they didn't care whether they met anyone or not. And, but it was interesting. It was an interesting job.
We hear a lot of our alumni tell us that their 4 years in Aurora, at Wells specifically, changed their lives, prepared them for life.
Yeah.
Whether it be in the workplace or all the situations you were facing with the war going on, or as new families expanding, or in your communities. Could you talk to for a minute? Was that true for you? That you were able to pull on your 4 years at Wells when you were in those complicated situations, or either in the workplace or at home, or?
Well, when we were at Wells, of course, in upstate New York, we didn't have much to do with a lot of these things. We used to.
No, but afterwards, I think, for example, like Miss Davis in the sociology class, she really opened up my mind.
Yeah.
And I'm really grateful to her. You know, she was very broad-minded. She was pointed out to us conditions, for example, that the blacks lived in Carter Woods. There was another guy
Yeah.
who did that. So I had a completely different attitude toward the blacks, frankly, than I had when I went up there. And that really changed my thinking.
And those were important conversations happening in the late 30s and
That's
early
right.
40s.
That's right.
And she was also the one who would take the classes to the women's prisons.
We
and
went,
places.
we went to Bedford's Women's Prison,
Yeah.
and they had dancing there. Remember, we danced.
Oh,
with
yeah,
the prisoners.
the prisoners.
I don't think the prisoners enjoyed it. But
No, they would arrange. She'd arrange these very interesting trips
Right.
to see these places, different places.
they broadened our exposure. You know,
Oh yes, definitely.
They took us to
Yeah,
a play.
yeah.
I remember Pins and Needles, about labor. Pins and Needles, I think was the
Yeah.
name of it. I'm not sure of the name, but something like connected with it. But yes,
Yeah.
I'm really grateful.
It was nice because it was so small, but you not only knew the ones in your class, but you knew the other classes too. Because when we'd go places and we'd meet people, and Joe would say to me, "You're always meeting somebody from Wells." And I said, well, it was so small that we not only knew our own class, but we knew the other classes. So often when we'd go places, we would meet somebody from other classes. And he could never, having gone to Princeton and Yale, he never could understand how you knew everybody. But we knew everybody. Yeah.
And from all over quite a wide spread. From the Midwest,
Oh, yeah.
and from the far West, and a couple
Oh.
Southerners.
Oh,
Of course,
yeah.
Southerners froze to death up there. But
And they still do.
I guess
Yeah.
What was the social life like? You went off campus presumably to date, or what? How did that happen on weekends? What did you do?
We were only allowed, when you were only allowed to go on the weekends, and you had to be in by 12 o'clock. And that road, especially between Cornell, because that was the closest, well, Hobart it was also nearby, but Cornell was the nearest men's college. And that road between Ithaca and Aurora on Saturday night, we had to be in by 12 o'clock. It was amazing that more people weren't killed because everybody would be trying to get back by 12 o'clock, remember? Oh, it was terrible. But, and then if you didn't, and then we had an honor system, and you were supposed to report when you were gone. I can remember being called in, and when we'd go to Cornell weekends or something, and then if you didn't report something that was wrong, it was the honor system you were supposed to report. Of course, we didn't, but they'd call us in and say, now, did you see her do this, that, or the other thing? And we wouldn't. It was so different, so different.
And then what would happen? How often might you go away for a whole weekend, either to go home
We
or
were only
someplace else?
allowed 3 weekends a month.
I never.
3 weekends a semester.
Jane went away more for weekends than I did.
You were only allowed I think it was 3 weekends a semester away from college. So you were very limited. That's why you got to know everybody, because most of the time you were there, and you got to know not only your own class but other classes because we were there. And but we were only allowed I think it was 3 weekends a month. At that point I used to come down to Princeton here, because not with Joe, but I was dating someone else from Princeton, and it took us all day. We had to take the train from Syracuse, which was an hour away from Aurora, down to Grand Central, and then the train from Grand Central to Princeton, and it used to take us all day to get here and all day to get home. But in those days you were allowed to take Fridays off once in a while on a weekend, and then you take a Friday off and you travel on Friday, and so you had little time. But the traveling was from Aurora was terrible because no one had cars, and so you had to take the train from Aurora, which was a little dinky train, either to Ithaca or to Syracuse to get a train to come anywhere. And it took forever to get anywhere. Oh, it's terrible. But so we didn't travel as much as today.
Right. And then locally, you weren't allowed to drink. I'm just talking about beer or something like that. With that, you had to stay outside 8 miles limit around, before you could, like David's Corners. You'd go to David's Corners or something like that. But within 8 miles, sort of circling Aurora, there was no drinking.
Yeah.
That was not necessarily always obeyed, but that was that was the rule.
Social life was so different in those days. When you think about it.
They had a movie every Saturday night at Macmillan Hall, and that was the entertainment, really. And occasionally, like once a month, they had maybe twice a month, they had another thing that's interesting. But the entertainment would be from a professional that some alumna had treated. There was somebody from Cleveland who was interested in the Cleveland Orchestra or something. So we had some very good events. And then on Sunday, we shared whoever, the priest or the rabbi or the minister, whoever came to Cornell in the morning would come up in the afternoon and have Vespers. And we had some very good speakers that way, and a good exposure to all different kinds of religious beliefs.
Yeah. It was quite isolated in those days. I mean, Aurora was very isolated. Now it isn't. Everybody has cars, but in those days we were really isolated. But coming from New York City, it was such a different way of life. Going to a small town like this in upstate New York, compared to what we were used to living in New York City, it was fun. It was fun. We enjoyed it.
Oh, I loved it, yes.
We enjoyed it. So, but I went there because Isabel had gone ahead of me for a year, and she persuaded me to come up there. And so,
I'm glad you did.
So now several decades have gone by since the 1940s, and you've all had a lot of life experiences. You've had families, and you've moved, and you've had jobs, and how have you managed to maintain this special relationship with each other?
Well, in the first place, our families were great friends. Her mother and my mother were very good friends. They used to come up to visit us at Wells. My mother didn't drive, but Isabel's mother did, and they would come up usually twice a year, spring and fall. They'd take a weekend off, the two ladies, and would come up to visit us at Wells. And then both our fathers were doctors. Well, Dr. Bill was my stepfather, so all the families had grown up together, and we knew each other from way back.
And we kept in touch.
So now I say we started out together, and we're ending up together.
Well, weren't you both maid or matron of honor in each other's weddings?
Oh, yes.
I was the maid of honor in Jane's wedding.
Okay.
And
Adrienne was probably.
And Adrienne, my sister, was.
Yeah.
But
and then we each have godparents of each other's children.
I was very fortunate. I have an extraordinary godchild.
I've heard that.
Yeah.
Then you ended up settling in Long Island.
Yes. Yeah. We first lived in Stuyvesant Town, which, by the way, was a marvelous place to live. as I recall, the rent was $75 a month, 2 bedrooms, you know, all facilities free, lovely grounds. They weren't beautiful, but they were functional playgrounds for the kids, and so we lived there for 10 years, and then we moved out. We were sending our children to private school, which we couldn't afford, so then we moved out to Seacliff, Long Island, which in those days was sort of a funky town. It was very nice, but now it's become, what's it called? It begins with the word
Gentrified.
Gentrified, thank you.
So you weren't too far away because our family was living in New Jersey all that time.
That's right. So we would get together. We didn't see each other as much.
We didn't see each other that much back in those days.
Maybe 2 or 3 times a year.
Because we didn't all have cars the way everybody has a car today. We only had the one car, and Joe had it most of the time, so we didn't see each other that much for a while.
But then we kept in touch.
But we kept in touch.
That Florida trip was, you know, one good way. And then a couple times a year we'd get together for dinner. I'd go to Jersey and Sefton, or you ought to come in.
And the interesting part was, we were married before Isabel and Bob, but when we went to their engagement party, on the way in, Joe said to me, well, I don't know this spell at all. And when they opened the door, they looked at one another. They had lived next to one another at Yale. Bob and Joe.
It's a funny coincidence.
Joe was at law school, and Bob was in architecture school. And they looked at one another and said, well, we live next to one another.
So, Jane, you've said to me so many times over the years how important education has been to your family, and I now know that from you, Isabel. When you think about your experience and now your grandchildren's experience, and you know how things have changed and how they've stayed the same, you know, what are your hopes and concerns for education?
In those days, in the first place, our classes were so small that we knew not only our own class, but other people, other women from other classes. Today, the grandchildren are so different than when they go to school. And in the first place, we all went to an all-girls school. And today, they never.
So they are.
So it's very different, very different. But it's fun to listen to them. It's fun for me to listen to the grandchildren and see the difference in education and everything else. I'm sure it is with you, too.
But I think it's outrageous, the charges of tuition. I think it's criminal what they charge. If they'd stop building a building, Oxford has gotten along a long time with no new buildings. And I think that for a family, an average family, to send children to college is outrageous.
I think it's safe to say, too, though, that both families have valued education through the generations. That's been passed on through.
Yes.
And the children, and even now the grandchildren, that's an important part of their lives. And in many cases, people have met their spouses, but it's enriched them. And we had role models for that, all of us.
Well, and I think it's incredibly special and unique that over 7 decades later, one, that you have this special friendship, but for Wells College, a college of 535 students, 147 years old, that both of you find a place for it in your life to still care about it.
Oh, yeah.
So
it's been wonderful, because when you think about when we were 4 or 5 years old when we met, and now it's wonderful. It's really been great. It's really been great.
And we made some good friends there, both of us, I think. So I really glad we were up in those Finger Lakes.
But there's nothing we can't tell about the other one, you know. We
That's
can
right,
tell all
blackmail.
kinds of things. If you wanted to, I could tell all sorts of things about her.
Fair deal, Jane.
But it's been fun. It's been great.
We've been lucky.
That's right.
Very lucky.
No, it's really wonderful to think that you can have a friend, be good friends after all these years, and still be able to move and do things.
It's very unusual.
We're very lucky. We're very lucky.
If you were giving advice to a college student today, whether it's your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren someday, or just college, just students in general, with your life experience, what would you say to them?
I guess I would say to mine, don't just think of a career. You know, people, so many young kids go into business because they can get a good job. I think ideally, find what you enjoy, or if you don't, when you go, try a variety of things and you'll find something. And if you're doing what you enjoy, you'll enjoy your life. And I think that would be it. But I think so many people are always concerned. I notice with my grandchildren, you know, this will help me in business or something like that. And I think it's better to go in there with an open mind and take a course, be daring, you know, and you might just, it could change your life very readily.
I think mine would be to enjoy people. I mean, I've always enjoyed, no matter, well, I majored in sociology, well, so did you, but just to enjoy, like when you move to a place like this, being able to talk to other people and enjoy talking to other people. Some people that live here never have anything to do with anybody else, you know, they really don't. But I mean, to me, living in a place like this is so interesting because you meet people from all over and who have had all different things to do with their lives. And it's been very interesting to me to be, not to just sit in your own place and not mingle with other people. Neither one of us have ever been like that.
Jane is very good. She's accepting. She's not a complainer, you know.
Yeah.
And you do find some of we old people, include myself in this, we complain.
Oh, no.
But Jane doesn't do that. I mean, that's true. You don't, Jane. You know, be honest.
Well, I think you're both saying, in different ways, get out of yourself. Be willing to take some risks, experiment a little bit, like with courses, get to know people that aren't just like you.
Yeah.
And that's obviously, you know, we've all growing up have heard that from both of you, and also, but the college, Wells and the sociology department, certainly reinforced any natural inclinations you had that way.
Oh, I think that's
Well,
true.
I think also taking advantage, like when we lived in Princeton, being able to audit courses at the university was wonderful because you could take courses that you had never taken in your lifetime and you wouldn't have to pay anything. I used to say one time when I was sitting next to a young fellow and he looked at me and he was saying, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, I'm auditing." And I said, "I'm listening to the same professor you are. I don't have to take the exams or write the papers, and I don't have to pay $45,000 a year." And because they couldn't understand how, but I thought living in Princeton was wonderful because you could audit all these things. I used to get the course book in September and see what courses there were, and some courses you couldn't audit, they didn't allow you to. And then I'd pick a course, and I always audited something. Though all the years we lived in Princeton, I always audited something. And it was such fun to go and listen to these professors, and it was wonderful.
This has been so much fun, and I hope it's been fun for both of you.
It certainly has.
At the very beginning, I think Isabel and you both talked about it. You set out to change the world, and I hope you feel, because I know we do, you have changed the world in small ways, in big ways, and ways you don't even know. Yeah. So thank you for today. But just thank you for being who you are.
Our pleasure to have you here.
Yeah, how wonderful.